The Missing Girl. Junko Furuta was a vibrant 17-year-old high school senior known for her determination and kindness. With dreams of graduation, college, and a bright future, Junko was an admired student, a dependable friend, and a loving daughter. Her dedication led her to take on a part-time job at a convenience store to help her family and save for her dreams. On a chilly November evening, she left school and made her way toward work, chatting and laughing with friends along the way. But that night, Junko never arrived at the store. When her shift started and she was nowhere to be seen, her coworkers assumed there had been a mix-up. As hours passed without word, concern deepened. Her family received the call that their responsible daughter hadn't shown up, and panic set in. They contacted friends, hoping Junko might have decided to stay out longer than usual, but no one had seen or heard from her since school. When their search turned up nothing, Junko's parents contacted the police. The news of Junko's disappearance spread quickly through the community. Flyers with her photo describing her bright smile and warm personality began appearing around town. Classmates, neighbors, and local authorities searched tirelessly, their optimism unshaken, even as days passed without answers. But there was a growing unease. No one had seen Junko. She had simply vanished. The mystery deepened as her friends and family clung to hope, refusing to believe that something terrible could have happened. As weeks passed, the city began to feel the weight of her absence. No leads, no sightings, only silence. Her friends grew more anxious, some of them plagued by nightmares and sleepless nights, haunted by the thought of what might have happened to her. Amid this sadness, 4 boys from Junko's school, Hiroshi, Joe, Shinji, and Yasushi, were oddly detached. They seldom mentioned Junko, avoided eye contact when her name came up, and seemed unnaturally calm amidst the tragedy. But their silence was drowned out by the community's increasing worry. In time, fear began replacing hope. The community that once buzzed with energy grew quiet as everyone braced for the worst. In Junko's absence, they held their collective breath, waiting, hoping, and fearing for the moment when they'd finally learn the truth, a chilling discovery. 2 agonizing weeks passed, and Junko's family clung to the slimmest hope while the community's fears intensified. Despite relentless searches, the police had few leads and no clear trail to follow. Their investigation remained stalled, with no sign of Junko. Her parents, devastated by the uncertainty, held on to the fragile belief that she might still return. One evening, a local resident noticed strange noises coming from an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Known to attract mischief makers, the warehouse had always been a place of minor trouble. But tonight was different. The sounds carried a darker tone. Muffled cries, strange bangs, and what seemed like desperate pleas for help filled the air. Alarmed, the resident quickly called the police, sharing their concerns about the suspicious activity. Officers arrived at the scene, flashlights illuminating the dilapidated building as they moved cautiously inside. The warehouse was in disrepair. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and floors littered with debris. The sounds had stopped, but there was a sense of something deeply wrong. As they searched each room, a heavy silence lingered, broken only by the officers' footsteps echoing in the large, empty halls. In a small, darkened room in the back of the warehouse, they made a chilling discovery. There, barely conscious and in a state of unimaginable suffering, lay Junko Furuta. She was bruised, weak, and bound in chains. The officers, shocked and horrified, immediately moved to help her, freeing her from her restraints. In her fragile state, Junko struggled to speak, but she managed to whisper the names of her captors, her schoolmates Hiroshi, Joe, Shinji, and Yasushi. The revelation was staggering. These boys, familiar faces from school, had kept her hidden away, subjecting her to cruelty and captivity. Junko was quickly taken to the hospital, where doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to stabilize her. News of her rescue spread rapidly, sending shockwaves through the community. The once quiet neighborhood erupted with anger and disbelief, struggling to comprehend the horror of what had happened. The investigation, now a criminal case, revealed chilling details. Evidence gathered from the warehouse painted a brutal picture of what Junko had endured. Her captors, once seen as normal teenage boys, were now viewed as perpetrators of an unthinkable crime. In the days that followed, the focus shifted to bringing them to justice. With the community and police working together, determined to see accountability for Junko Furuta. Unmasking the monsters. Junko's rescue ignited a storm of outrage across her town. As news spread of her ordeal and the identities of her captors became public, the community was in shock. The four boys, Hiroshi, Joe, Shinji, and Yasushi, were not strangers but familiar faces, classmates who walked the same school halls as Junko. People struggled to reconcile the image of these ordinary teenagers with the monstrous acts they had committed. They had led seemingly average lives, blending in with the crowd, and no one had suspected what they were capable of. Now these boys sat in custody, awaiting justice. During questioning, each of them denied involvement, claiming innocence, and even attempting to implicate each other. But as detectives pressed, cracks began to appear in their stories, and one by one, their defenses crumbled. The investigators unearthed a web of lies, manipulation, and violence that left even the most seasoned officers disturbed. With every new revelation, the depth of Junko's suffering became clearer, and the community's outrage grew. The evidence found at the warehouse was undeniable. Junko's belongings, photographs, and chilling documentation of the abuse she'd suffered at their hands were all laid out. Each item and each testimony painted a picture of calculated cruelty. Junko, though traumatized, was determined to speak up, identifying the boys and bravely recounting what she had endured. Her testimony shocked the courtroom and the entire community, transforming her from a victim to a survivor. The community, horrified, turned to anger, demanding that the boys be held accountable. Public protests erupted outside the courthouse, with supporters holding signs calling for justice for Junko. They could not comprehend how such brutality had been carried out by teenagers, boys they knew, some who lived just down the street. In response to the community's demand for justice, the legal team representing the boys argued for leniency, citing their youth and lack of criminal history. They claimed the boys were just kids who made a mistake. However, the community saw through the defense's argument. They argued these weren't innocent missteps of youth, but deliberate, horrific actions that warranted real punishment. As the trial progressed, the public's call for justice echoed through every court proceeding, fueling the prosecutor's resolve to seek the maximum penalty for each boy. The courtroom became a stage for the unfolding horror, but also for the community's demand for accountability. Junko's bravery in coming forward gave voice to the community's pain, and they rallied behind her, determined to unmask the monsters hiding in plain sight. A trial for justice. Junko's trial became a focal point of public outrage and grief, drawing crowds, media, and supporters who demanded justice. Weak but resilient, Junko bravely took the stand, recounting in painstaking detail the horrors she had endured. Her testimony stunned the courtroom into silence. The truth of her suffering left everyone shaken. As she spoke, the weight of her experience became real to those watching, turning her into a symbol of strength and survival. The four boys, Hiroshi, Joe, Shinji, and Yasushi, now had to face the consequences of their actions. They appeared in court, shifting uncomfortably under the collective gaze of a community that once saw them as regular teenagers. Initially, they maintained a cold silence, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of their crimes. But under mounting evidence and public pressure, they confessed, each trying to place blame on the others, hoping to lessen their own guilt. Their defense attorneys argued for leniency, emphasizing the boys' youth and lack of previous offenses. They claimed that the boys had made a terrible mistake, blaming peer pressure and immaturity. This defense infuriated the public, who saw it as a flimsy excuse for the suffering they had inflicted. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs and chanted for justice, making it clear that the community would not tolerate anything less than a full sentence. As the trial continued, the prosecution built a strong case. They presented damning evidence from the warehouse, along with testimonies from detectives and Junko herself, all painting a picture of premeditated cruelty. The prosecutors argued that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but an extended, calculated series of actions that revealed the boys' true character. They urged the court to set an example, asserting that youth was not an excuse for escaping responsibility. After weeks of testimonies and deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The judge handed down a sentence that, while significant, still left some feeling that true justice had not been fully served. The community wrestled with relief and frustration. Although the boys were convicted, some argued that no sentence could truly account for the suffering Junko had endured. In the years following, Junko worked to rebuild her life, her courage inspiring the community and sparking important conversations about justice, safety, and the need for vigilance. Though scarred, Junko's strength became a beacon for others, and her story would remind everyone of the resilience and hope that can emerge from even the darkest situations. The memory of her endurance and bravery continued to resonate, leaving a legacy that ensured she would be remembered not as a victim, but as a survivor.